Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes, and welcome back to the YoVideogames podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Andrew.
And once again, thank you to all our generous patrons who kept us going for over 350 episodes.
Yeah, if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Due to the week is Pretzel Box. Thank you, Pretzel Box.
Thank you, Pretzel Box.
And as always, we have a sponsor to thank. And of course, we're talking about Manscaped. And right now, they have just launched, just shortly ago, the Beard Hedger Pro. I'm a huge fan of this thing. It is maybe the easiest thing I've ever had to talk about for sponsorship because I am loving using this. And there's a few really good reasons. One, it's very sharp, and so it works really good on your thick-ass beard hair. But two is the adjustable guide or guard, the blade guard. You don't have to take it off. You don't have to swap it out. You just crank it to whatever number you need, and so it lets you, and because it's done by 0.5 millimeters, it lets you get like a really good I guess fade would be the wrong word. I'm not a barber, but sort of like that gradient into your like sideburn hair, which if you're like me and you're follically challenged up top, yeah, it's hard to keep your hair long enough to where you don't notice a like sharp line between your beard and your hair.
So it's not like just like sliding out a bunch of different like plastic little,
Yeah, you don't have to do like a million different guards to try and get it. And, you don't like, you could do halfway between a 4 and a 5 or a 2 and a 1. And so you can get like a really clean sideburn look, which again, if you can have long hair, you're probably like, who gives a fuck about that? But for us boys that have to keep it short, gotta be honest with you, it's pretty good. But the Beard Hedger Pro Kit comes with like literally everything you need for a beard. I'm gonna pop up a picture because it's easier than just like showing you one after another the various things. But it's got a brush, it's got the beard conditioner, it's got your beard balm, it's got beard shampoo, beard oil, it's got the comb, and it's got some really sharp scissors for doing your mustache and any errant hairs. Now, I am now a few weeks into using it. I've used every single thing. Normally, I had never used like a beard shampoo or anything like that, but like a beard oil is, I gotta admit, maybe my new favorite thing to do. And you might, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's like an expert on this, that's like, this is actually what you're using for, but you might be wondering why it's my new favorite thing. It's a really neutral smell. Like it's not a strong smell, so it's not going to just like be burning your nostrils. But you know that like itchy skin you get when you like wash your beard and then you don't dry very well, or for whatever reason water gets trapped on your skin, so you get itchy skin under your beard. Beard oil seems to just get rid of that. You like rub it into your hair, and then I like to use the brush. I'll brush my dog, and then I'll not with this brush, but then
I'll hope not
brush me. And so now the brush sort of has a little bit of like beard oil in it, so it has that like neutral smell, and then it just feels great on my my beard, and then my beard stays like tame and nice, and I don't get itchy skin under my beard anymore. So I'm a big fan of this thing. And it has a 60-minute battery, and I kind of do like a trim once a week. So it's like 5-6 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes if I'm really like trying to do something fancy. But so I've only charged it once in 3 weeks, which is pretty great for me. The others that I've tried have never performed this well. So I'm very happy with this. If you're interested in checking this out, or any of the other products, especially like their Boxers 2.0, which we are also huge fans of, or the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, again, huge fans of, and I'm actually out of now. I got to order more. Please head over to manscaped.com. Use our code YoVG, all caps, for 20% off and free shipping worldwide. That's code YoVG, all caps, at manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping worldwide. Your balls will thank you.
Well, in this case, your beard.
My beard will thank you. Really do love the thing, though. Speaking of loving a thing. I wonder how all the people who love VR are doing right now because
Yeah, so PlayStation VR 2 kind of came out this last week, and we didn't hear a whole lot about it. I didn't hear, and that's because it had a very bizarre launch where you could only order it from Sony directly.
right, very subdued too. So it's not on any
Yeah.
shelf. There's no like big push in a store. Now granted, I don't know how many of us have gone to GameStop in the last few years,
Yeah,
but
that did you there was a, that reminds me of another report from a GameStop manager or whatever was just saying like it's a ghost town in here. Nobody comes in. Like
well,
it was funny listening to this because I'm just kind of like, wow, that sounds like heaven.
yeah.
I would have loved that when I worked, from my days in video game retail. I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine just a ghost town? People just never come into your store.
Well,
Oh, it'd be great.
is GameStop dying because used games are a racket?
I
Like
mean,
it used to be you could go get a game that was 3 weeks old and you'd get it for like half price,
well, you
or
didn't. You get it for $5 off. That was the problem. The
right,
problem was is that like used games was a great thing, but GameStop made it irrelevant because they were too close to the original price of the original product. So it was like, what's the point?
right. So why
Um,
risk getting a scratch disc when I'll just pay the extra $5 and get a
five
brand new
bucks.
game?
Yeah.
Used game stores used to be where you'd go, I don't know, a year after a game came out and find a gem for $5 in a bin, and
Yeah.
instead now GameStop made it into like games have better holding power than fucking used cars up until a year ago. Like, what is that about? Or is it entirely that like everybody realizes buying digitally is easier and is the future?
That's it. Then that's really it. Was digital kind of took over during COVID. Really kind of like hammered some nails home for people who couldn't go out.
And console company, the first parties, they love that.
They love it too, yeah, because they're getting all the profit, and yeah. The other problem too is just that like discs are worthless because you put a disc in the PS5 or an Xbox
And you
Series X,
download anyway. Yeah.
and it just takes the data off the disc and puts it onto the hard drive.
It doesn't even take the data off the disk in some cases. In some cases, you have to be connected to the internet anyway because
Yeah,
it
like
downloads it from the server.
yeah, because it's actually so much bigger than a Blu-ray can even hold.
Like
That
what? It's sort of nonsensical these days. How one, I always thought that was a push to make sure that your console was connected to the internet because live services
yeah,
is
it
the future for
was.
them. But now it's like games are so big that it's almost pointless to put them on a disc. Like it's almost silly to hamper your game by having to fit it to a disc.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are very much like, well, I don't want physical media to go away. I like collecting games physically. There's this whole big, like,
Totally
hardcore
understand that. Yeah.
cry for it. And I'm like, I'll still buy physical copies of games if I really like the game.
Yeah. I mean,
Otherwise, a lot of the times I'm just like, yeah, I'll just buy digitally, whatever. I don't care.
there's something to be said for games just disappearing forever. Same way like Netflix can just decide a show you love, they're not going to have it on the platform anymore.
Right. And this
And you
opens up
can't buy DVDs, you can't do anything. Yeah.
yeah, and this really opened up the greater discussion about piracy in general because the 3DS and the Wii U are going offline this month. So tons and tons and tons and tons of product are just disappearing from Nintendo's virtual store forever. And it's like, well, what do people do about it now? I'm like, well, they're both very easily emulatable systems.
Yeah.
I'm
Piracy.
not advocating for you to break the law. I'm just saying that it's like, well,
The waters aren't patrolled anymore, lads.
I'm like, well, I mean, it's just kind of like what this is there is a preservation aspect to piracy that's great because it especially for arcades too, because there's a lot of like just random ass arcades from random ass, publisher developers for arcade games, in the 80s, early 90s that don't exist, period.
Yeah.
And it's like you have two options. You could go to Galloping Ghost and pray that it's there somehow.
Which we're big fans of. Go ahead, do that.
Which
Spend
it
your money
might
at
be
Galloping
because
Ghost. It's
there's
great.
like 800 to 900 games. There's like 880 something games there, which it might be. Or there's emulation because the company doesn't exist. There's no way to physically. There never was a way to physically own it, like as a
Right.
consumer. It's just this is it. This is how it's. I guess this is At least it exists. Like, because I would,
Realistically, if the company doesn't exist, you're also just not hurting anybody.
yeah, no one's getting
Emulate the
hurt.
shit out of that.
Yeah, no one's getting hurt from a dead Ireme game or something like that. And someone will
Right.
be like, Ireme technically has some fucking holder who owns the IP and he lives in like a fucking like mansion in like South Korea or something.
And fuck that guy specifically. That's all I'm saying. Find out his name and flip him off every time you do it.
Yeah, just like some guy just owns the IP because he just bought them on like some fucking like fire sale when the company went out.
Have you ever had the particular luck to explain to a Gen Z that how piracy was just 10 years ago?
Justin, no, I don't think so. No.
I guess 16 years ago now, but like what piracy was like, 15 years ago in the heyday of piracy. I had the weirdest experience where like I explained it to a friend of mine who's like 22, 23, I think is how old he is. And like just blowing his mind because he never lived in a world where it was inconvenient to get games and also where piracy was just like a thing everybody who was on the internet knew how to do.
Well, there was a point in time where it was very, 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 I mean, it still is.
Truly, we were frontiers.
For PC gaming, it's very easy to still pirate new games. But there was a point in time where, like, the latest consoles, well, one in particular was just, two in particular were just really, really easy. Like, the Wii and the 360 were just very easy to pirate for.
Yeah.
During their heyday.
Yeah.
During the time when they were alive.
Piracy has always been something that's sort of exaggerated in terms of its effect, but this was like the most I've ever seen piracy be in the limelight because it was just sort of like what we had always said. If you make it more convenient to buy games, people will choose buying over pirating just from an effort standpoint. Yeah, same with content in general.
Oh yeah, because like I mean, it was like, oh, you got to go the whole. You had to buy before digital downloads were really a thing. It was like going to GameStop hoping they had it. Having to sit through their fucking spiel about signing up for their membership. All this.
The whole experience of going to a game store went from being able to browse and talk to a person about games that you love to getting a spiel about the GameStop credit card.
Yeah.
Like I don't fucking care, dude. Just give me the thing. I know you don't want to do it, and I don't want to hear it. Just please. But then they'd lose their job, and I don't want that.
Yeah. Although, and which contrasts now, apparently, because now the stores are fucking dead. Who knew? Like,
well, that's just rough. I wonder if there will ever be an independent game store again. There's a couple of retro ones.
I think there's, yeah, you kind of have to rethink what you're doing as a store. To be a retro game, just to be a game store in general. I think in this day and age, especially if you're independent in any way, shape, or form, you got to really rethink what you're doing, what you're selling, what the point of your business. I don't know. It's weird in general because like I drive by a mall and I think, who the fuck goes to a mall anymore? I mean, people are there, but it's like, what the fuck are you buying there?
I sort of like buying online is convenient for things that you'd like going to use all the time and want, but I still feel like there is I like to go and hold the thing and think about.
I agree too to a large extent, but I'm just kind of
games ain't one of them.
If you walk through a mall, because for Christmas I was doing this when I was buying like gifts for like family and shit, and it was just kind of like noticing like people are here. No one's buying anything in the stores. Like, in fact, most people weren't even in the stores.
They were looking at shit or sipping coffee, sitting
They were just hanging around in all the areas in the middle.
Yeah.
Or they'd go into a store that had free samples of anything and sniff it or eat it. I saw a lot of people just walking through stores. You go to cash register, no, there was no line at any store for any cash register. And this was getting pretty close to Christmas. Like I walked through like a Macy's and there was no line anywhere.
Well, malls are also run like a fucking joke.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how any store survives in a mall.
I don't know either because like we always hear about how like they always charge so much for rent there. And I'm like, who's fucking selling?
Yeah,
Like,
they charge a percentage. They don't even charge like a flat fee. They charge a fucking percentage on top of a flat fee. So you have a bare minimum you must pay. And if you make over that, you pay a percentage of your
mhm.
earnings over that. Like, what the fuck? Who would do? In what fucking world would any? Not worth it. Go to a strip mall. Deal with an older gentleman who owns the strip mall. Don't deal with the mall. Fuck the
Yeah.
Westfields. But this is all a sidetrack about VR because Reggie Fils-Aimé tweeted, "Until there is a must-play experience, this will be true." And what is he talking about? This VR gaming destined to remain niche. It's a little graph from Statista that is just depressingly showing how little VR hardware actually sells, and how little they project it to sell over the next 5 years. And I think, as you've said before, Reggie don't lie. He's right.
Well, he's pretty good at reading market analysis or whatever.
Yeah, someone should hire him to be a CEO. Like, dude's great at it. But VR gaming in particular, the thing I want to talk about is like, what is it going to take? What's the thing that's going to make VR take off, become mainstream, become viable, make VR gaming worth putting billions into, or at least millions?
I've always been on the train of like I actually don't know the real like I don't actually have a good answer to this because I think VR is always going to be neat, handicapped over the fact that it's not convenient to use. Like VR needs to be I don't have any glasses around me, but it's like VR needs to be literally just like I put on a pair of glasses
Yeah, no
or
goggles,
maybe
no.
like put some earbuds in and that's fucking it. It
Hmm.
needs to be like that simple, lightweight, foldable, just that has to be that. Which people say like there's no way. Of course there's not right now. But
Well,
it's neat.
VR often gets compared to handhelds, and
I don't know why. Because handheld was all about convenience factor.
right,
Handheld
and
was
handhelds were always, m- by their nature, more convenient than other forms of gaming. Right?
yeah.
That's the idea. But people were like, "Oh, the first Game Boy was an ugly brick that you couldn't really take anywhere you wanted. Then you had to carry, 4 extra batteries with you if you wanted to play longer than an hour, and you had to like there was all
I
these
mean
things."
the first Game Boy lasted like 10 hours, 6 to 10
Yeah, no, it
on it
lasted
wasn't the
fine,
Game
but
Gear didn't, but
it's it's that same argument of how like portables had to have a must play game before they really exploded. And before we started recording, I mentioned like Pokemon was kind of that game where like I had a Game Boy growing up, but like when Game Boy really exploded and all of a sudden every kid I knew had a Game Boy is when like Pokemon Red and Blue, when Pokemon just exploded. And so I see what Reggie's saying here is like if there's a must play game, if there's a game that
right.
like hits the zeitgeist that everybody wants in on,
Hmm.
yeah, that'll be the thing because as more people buy the hardware becomes something worth investing in, becomes something where like maybe eventually they do have the glasses and the earbuds and that's it. Uh, but somebody's got to buy the big clunky Game Boy first. There's got to be a market for that before you ever get the Game Boy Color. You know what I mean?
But I mean, like, here's what a lot of people don't realize about like the Game Boy, the original Game Boy in '89. It launched for less than $100. Granted, I know money was
80s
80
money. Yeah.
80s money, 89 money, $80 or $90 in 80s money is a lot more than today, but it was a less than $100. The games were cheaper than the console games at the time by a
Hmm.
good $20 to $30. It was a cheaper alternative, and it was something you could play on a bus, on a train, in a car, in a box with a fox. Um, so there was convenience factor. It wasn't outrageously expensive. Like the software wasn't outrageously expensive either. It was significantly more sophisticated than a Tiger handheld. Um,
It definitely has advantages over uh, VR, but I still think that correlation is true. It was popular, but not the way it exploded into becoming until there
But
was that one
I
thing.
think portable gaming was way bigger with Game Boy started than VR has ever been. You
Oh
look
yeah,
at the
well
chart;
yeah.
it is like what it is 1%.
Well, what's the thing that convinces you to buy it?
To buy VR.
Yeah, like what it,
I honestly don't fucking know. You know, like the thing I would want the most in VR is something like a really, really good Rogue Squadron.
I could do it. Yeah,
Maybe even like like a co-op Rogue Squadron.
it plays to the
Um,
current VR strengths for sure.
yeah. Or F-Zero.
F-Zero would be
Like
fun.
a big 30-40 person race online F-Zero experience in VR.
Well, that
Fantastic.
is exactly what I think is the thing that needs to happen. There needs to be an online competitive game, be it their own
Mhm.
Halo or an F-Zero or something, just something that drags you and that makes you want to buy this thing and get good at it to
Mhm.
compete against other people. What's the thing that VR can do offers immersion that you can't necessarily get from
Yeah, it
staring
offers
at a
yeah,
screen?
it's the immersion factor, but like here's the real other problem with VR is that like and this is where I think the Game Boy comparisons probably come in, is that what does VR do? What does VR offer that you can't get gameplay wise? From a gameplay standpoint, what can VR do that current consoles don't? And it's the
Right.
same argument for Game Boy. Well, Game Boy doesn't do anything different. In fact, Game Boy was worse than the consoles at the time. And I remember there is like from the older gen, you know, from us was fucking as they were called boomers, um, us boomer generation would like there were people who didn't like portable gaming at all when it was brand new because like
Right.
it's a step back. Why would I play this? Is a step back. Um, and for me, it was more just kind of like I can take it to the schoolyard. I can
Yeah.
show it to people. But yeah,
I
like
can
what
slip it
is?
in a pocket. I can slip it in my backpack
I
and
mean,
just
we could slip Game Boys in our pockets because in the '90s we had Jinko jeans.
oh, that shit's coming back, dude. Gen Z and younger, they're all wearing those baggy ass jeansy and stuff. I was like, damn, I could bust out those corduroys from 2002. Just baggy as shit with like the Vans or the Etnies. Hell yes.
So yeah, this is the problem I find with VR is that it's cool, but it's a peripheral right now because the thing is VR as it is on console, like so PSVR 2 is not comparable to the Game Boy. It's comparable to the Sega CD. It's a peripheral that requires the console, the PS5, to stick into the PS5 before it can play.
Right.
And it has a whole extra library of games that have to be made just for the PSVR. It's a Sega CD. Now, there are things like the Meta 2 or whatever, which is standalone. You just stick it on your head, all the shit is there. But that went up in price,
Right.
not down. And its power is somewhat limited compared to say a high-end gaming PC.
Right. And I look, there is a load of challenges for VR. I think we have both made it pretty much known that we think VR is sort of doomed to fail. And
Yeah, I don't think VR headsets in general are like doomed as an entire industry.
but
I
VR
just
gaming necessarily.
gaming. I just don't know that VR gaming is I don't know if the time is right for it. I don't know if the time will ever be right for it, but I think the potentially the time when it will be right again is when it's basically like is easy and is lightweight and simple as putting on a pair of glasses, and then you have little earbuds. That's it.
I definitely think augmented reality, they have shit like that for augmented reality. Google Glass did augmented
Right,
reality.
but that's like putting like just shit in front of your eyeballs. I mean, like
Well, it
glasses
also
that
lets
like
you interact with
mm,
your environment and stuff. You can do a lot of escape room shit. You can do a lot of like murder mystery shit. Like I realize that that's not necessarily what we're talking about, but I do think that that is a step in the direction of what you're talking about. Is like
yeah.
where you can
I mean,
just put on your
the thing you need is that you need to have something that seals off the areas around your eyes so that you're not seeing outside. If you just look a little too hard left or right, you see outside the glasses and you see like, nothing's there. Like,
right
right. Like that's what you need is like, but the glasses need to have like some little like foam protection or whatever to just, okay, it
now.
does seal off my vision. So I'm not losing that immersion aspect. Because
I
I've heard this
understand.
problem with the Mario Kart ride. I haven't ridden it yet. But the Mario Kart ride apparently has this issue because you're wearing augmented reality goggles. And the thing is that you can kind of see peripherally out your sides, and and if you look too far, you drift your eyeballs too far away, you lose the whole immersion of the character supposed to be on the track
Right.
in front of you.
Well, and that's why I say what you really need is a motorcycle helmet that you put on. It's got smell-o-vision in it, and then just like a big
Oh my
matrix style
god.
spike that just feeds into the back. That's
Oh
what's
my
up. You got
god.
smell-o-vision, you got surround, like
Well,
you can't see out of it, and then you got surround sound hearing.
this actually brings up an interesting point because they actually have these experiences like in certain places around the world, of VR, kind of like not arcades, but like VR event or VR experiences, right? Um,
Oh, well, yeah, where you're
whole
moving
like
around in like
well,
a VR
there's
space, right?
yeah, there's that. I've seen the one I've seen a lot of is people like they go into this room full of all these like motorcycles that are just like mounted on top of like basically stationary boxes. They get on, the headset comes on, they put the headset on, and they're like riding a motorcycle, right? For
Or
whatever the
the alien experience.
yeah, which we never got to do.
Yeah.
From what I understand, there was a VR experience plan. There's an upcoming theme park in Florida, that for the Universal's Epic Universe, where Florida will finally get the Mario and Donkey Kong lands and rides and whatever. So they're going to have a Ministry of Magic area, right? And apparently this was scrapped. There was going to be a VR ride, a VR broomstick ride, and potentially one of like there's no real reason. Everything's all rumor. So just the ride existing is a rumor, and the ride getting canceled its own rumor. And so we're going to talk about rumors on rumors here. One of the big reasons they think that it might have been canned was the logistics of getting people to go in, put this big headset on, and having the ride ops go in, make sure everyone's secured, everyone's good,
Mm.
and then starting it up, and then the getting on and getting off of the ride
Too much of a learning curve.
was just too much. It takes too much time. Like just too
Hmm.
much time in general, because you put a headset on, you have to like put it on, you have to do some tracking, you have to make sure it's comfortable. Like there's too much shit involved in VR, and that kind of is like in a way, it's a perfect example of why VR has this issue. Because like if you go to Universal Studios Florida right now, you go on like Gringotts, for example, and it's like a roller coaster. You get on, you get a pair of glasses halfway through the line, you get on and you put on the glasses.
Right.
You don't have the right to take off the glasses
And throw it in a bin.
throw it in a bin. Like that's sadly to me, I'm getting like it's like they can do this and move the line quickly because it's just a pair of glasses you put on your face after the ride's begun.
Well, that's why I'm such a big fan and why I really want to try those laser tag type experience where you put on like the vest thing
Yeah,
and
you
then
got
you're
like
carrying
a
a rifle.
backpack.
Yeah, and like it's connected sort of wirelessly streaming what
You're
your
basically
environment
in a
is. And,
mocap studio.
yeah, and like but you're doing laser tag because your gun's a laser tag gun basically.
Yeah.
I think that shit's cool. I think that's the way we need to lean towards. And here's sort of the weird thing is you mix that with the paintball idea where you can allow people to bring their own rigs where it's like you can customize your gun, you can customize, the trigger and the helmet and all that shit. Like you can trick it out and then come in, put on your gear and play. Again, I think competitiveness is what unlocks the door. Paintball used to be you used to literally use a pistol that was made for marking trees and logging. And then those dudes like started doing games, and then they started showing up with like tricked out pistols, and then somebody built the first fucking paint marker as a rifle, and then companies formed around it, and like that modding community is maybe what's missing. Because right now, if you really love VR, you buy the headset and you can't do shit with it. Like you can't futz with it or fuck with it or do it. Like you can't build your own custom one to have a beefier rig. As far as I know, there's
Yeah,
not really like a
there's no upgradability path. Like the VR headset is the VR headset. I don't know if they can ever get to a point where it's like what you're gonna like replace the lenses, you're gonna upgrade the lenses, upgrade the hardware tech inside it.
right.
You just buy a wholesale new VR headset right now.
And that is where I think like that's the two paths, right? You either have a very accessible slip-on glasses and call it a fucking day, or you have the hyper modifiable, basically what the PC market is today.
And the thing is, when they think about modifiable, they think inside the game, the metaverse.
Right.
The
Yeah. And fuck all those.
metaverse, everything's about the metaverse. You're gonna buy and sell and like live your digital life. Everything will be a virtual metaverse version of everything.
I'm so glad that crashed and burned.
Well, I like how even like Phil Spencer was just like, this is just not a good. It's not a good product.
Phil Spencer also hasn't really been wrong.
He just was like, yeah, like the game itself is kind of crappy. Like he just threw massive shade at Zuckerberg there, just like, yeah, no, like we're not investing in that because like that's just not a good. It's just not a good game to begin with.
I mean, honestly, you probably would have, and maybe this already exists, but Microsoft could have done something where they're just like, here's a cheap rig to be able to do VR Minecraft.
Yeah.
It's just a cheap VR rig because we know that it takes nothing to run Minecraft graphically or anything like that. So here's a really comfortable, cheap rig that lets you run Minecraft. And then they build their own Minecraft metaverse. And watch the money flow in and Zuckerberg cry.
It's just one of those things where it's like
if he has human emotion.
I don't even like. Okay, it's weird to think about now because like there's two. The other thing we were talking about today is also kind of a problem, and that is people don't go to stores really anymore, and like getting a hold of it. So it's kind of like people don't just go get a new VR. Like I remember I've seen them at Best Buy, but like it always seems like. To me, it always seems like they're kind of weirdly supply constrained. So it's kind of like you got to go online a lot of the times and just kind of like hope it gets sent to you. And I can't tell you why there is supply constraints. My guess is just because there's a lot of little pieces inside of any given VR headset's going to have a lot of individual parts and blah blah blah. Like assembly can't be easy.
I don't think I've ever seen like a try it type thing in a Best Buy or
I have. But I was like, there's no fucking way.
I'm not gonna put that on my face. I guess that's a bad idea. But I don't think I've ever seen a try it type station outside of E3.
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe that's another thing. Like you can't sell someone on a completely brand new experience if it's not anchored to something else. I don't know. That I was thinking for a while that like an Ark Survival Evolved or like another I like a survival type game like Rust or something would be a good one for VR. That total immersion, but
it's putting shit like that like in the Dave and Buster's, they put you on like a simulated seat that moves and you put a headset on. They have like some King Kong, Jurassic Park like games or something like that. Like those aren't bad. The problem is that requires a ride op. Or the thing is just going to be like immediately like ripped off and stolen, or just destroyed,
or it'll just break down because it's got a lot of moving parts
in it.
Different body weights and stuff. People don't realize how often that shit breaks down just purely from how many.
Because again, the thing is just kind of like, hey, try this video game. Okay, I just hand someone a controller,
and it goes,
right. It's like. Here's a Game Boy Pocket. And here's a Game Boy. Try it. Oh, okay.
And gaming already isn't a cheap hobby. To add on another $500.
Yeah, $550 for five, and we're getting, I believe, the $550 in North America. That's the cheaper end price. I think it's more elsewhere in the world.
That's really rough, and it's probably a lot more in like Australia. Australia seems to get screwed a lot for pricing.
Yeah, I from what I understand, everyone else, especially Europe and whatnot, they are paying way more for PSVR 2 than we're paying. We're paying $550, which is already $50 more than the base system. So you have to pay with taxes pretty much anywhere you are. You're going to be paying $1,100 or at least $1,050 before owning a single game. And then you own a game, and then it's over $1,100 to buy one game. So if you bought a PSVR 2, a PS5, and one game, you are paying over $1,100 plus tax.
And then, if you're unlucky, you get like the 1-2 switch of VR games.
Right? Oh yeah.
And you quit.
I mean, you basically it's fucking Neo Geo at that point.
Yeah, it's a tough hurdle. I honestly don't know. I don't know how they get past it.
Yeah,
And
because
I
again,
feel
Game
like all
Boys
of my
were cheap. They
ideas.
were always cheap and convenient and easy to use. And that's why phones blew up. Now, phones were not cheap. Like smartphones, the introduction of them was not cheap, but they were always trying to grift you with some fucking like sign up plan,
Right.
right? Or like a monthly plan. Well, you got to pay for your phone monthly anyways. You might as well like let's just split up the cost of the thing for like a year, and then they basically put you in like a lease loop where like you're upgrading every year and you're never ever going to pay it off.
Right.
You'll just switch to the next phone, which is almost kind of genius, but also of course scummy as hell or whatever. But like phones are convenient, and you need a phone,
Right.
so but it's convenient and it's easy to use and da da da. Like VR is none of these things.
Yeah, it's hard to. I feel like all my ideas are still sort of outlandish. But I do truly feel like there has to be some sort of competitive draw for VR.
It's weird because like the pandemic should have been like kind of like the boom for VR, but it kind of hit this like weird point where it was like there was the burst of initial of like the Vive and like whatever that Samsung cheapo one was, and PSVR 1 and what have you, right? I forget what like the sort of mainstay VR was originally. I know like Valve had their own as well. And
Yeah,
then
the Oculus and
yeah, Oculus Rift or whatever. And so like they came out a couple years before the pandemic. So that when the pandemic hit, it wasn't like, oh my God, let's switch to this. Everyone went to fucking Animal Crossing.
like
Instead, like this was
yeah.
VR's time to shine rather than here's VR2 after the pandemic.
Well, one thing that Nintendo has always done very, very well is accessibility. Like
Yeah.
when you look at a Switch, it looks like something you can just pick up and fuck around. It looks like a toy. A Switch does look like a toy. Its color schemes
It looks like an iPad for that you can dick
for
around with
kids.
kids. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
That is got to be on purpose. You look at a PS5 or you look at the Xbox One X, One XXX1
Series X.
Series X. You look at it and it looks. They now have the same intimidation factor as looking at a higher end PC,
Yeah, looks like
and
a computer tower.
yeah, that's cool if you're into that. But if you're like, hey, I know I'm going to have 2 weeks where I have nothing to do, the accessible thing is going to be the thing you go for. You're not suddenly going to be like, well, I'm going to get really into off roading. Like, I'm going to buy a Jeep and build it out. I've never fucked with cars ever before. I make that joke because that's the thing that I'm starting to look into.
Off-roading?
Yeah, but I don't really give a shit about cars. So it's hard to, I just want to get to the place where I can backpack and see places that aren't like a million people there.
Mm.
And so I've been looking into off-roading where I was like, oh, okay, maybe I have to get into cars, but I don't.
What about like being airlifted into an area?
Yeah, would you skydive into somewhere that you then camp for a week and backpack out?
You backpack out or get helicoptered out?
No, you backpack out.
No, I'd want to get helicoptered out, but at a different point. Like you land, you skydive somewhere, then you have to like backpack to your exafil.
That seems more expensive than just buying a Jeep.
Well, skydiving's not cheap.
No, I know, but it's cheaper to jump out of the plane. They don't have to come back.
If we're talking blue sky here, anyways, where I'm already having to get like airdropped in, I want to get airlifted out.
Fair.
Mostly just because like I want to airlift in, and I want to feel the fucking vastness of the wilderness, and then I want to have that experience of seeing the how big and expansive it is. Like giving that feeling of like, oh God, like look how far away you were from anything.
Yeah, I just want to be totally, utterly alone for a minute.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying like on the same day. Obviously, it's you get airlifted in, you do your big hike, and then at some point you get airlifted out, and it's just kind of like, wow. Like,
the sad thing is this is the comparable thing to getting into VR. Getting into VR is $1,000.
Maybe that would be a really cool experience where it's just kind of like you have this sort of set up, like it's even set up like time wise. Where like, hey, here's this VR game. It's a survival ish game or whatever, right? Everyone gets their VR headset in, and then at this specific hour, you're in like a lobby with other people, and you get airlifted like in game to an island.
Oh.
And like when you stop playing the game, you're like, I'm gonna go to sleep or whatever. And there's a point in time, like you have to go back, you've logged back on. We're getting extracted at this point, and that's how like you accumulate or cash out whatever you've collected or done is to get airlifted out. Otherwise, you have to wait around for the next airlift chopper, right? So it'd be kind of fun if it was like this communal thing to like, oh, we're gonna get airlifted into this thing. We're gonna try to like mine some resource or do something or whatever, hunt some fucking big, T-Rex or something or whatever, right? And then the exophil comes in and you have to be there when you get extracted out.
I wonder if that's maybe one of the things really holding back VR is it just doesn't look good enough yet. So
That's
it's not
also another
immersive enough yet.
that is kind of a problem because the thing is, I know you probably didn't watch it, but like seeing the Atmos Dolby of like Way of Water, it's like
Right.
man, if gaming will get there, it will get there. When gaming has that fucking visual fidelity, holy Jesus God, like
Yeah, like when you can get that into VR so that it really feels like you're there. I
like
mean,
going to Pandora and coming out, like
yeah, I feel like, yeah, okay, then there's going to be a pretty good unique selling point there, you know. Um I don't I don't know how long it'll take to get there because that seems like that'll be god awful technology to develop in terms of expense. But there's a lot of hurdles for VR, and I'm not sure.
But I mean, like, the thing is, though, those who have taken the plunge will tell you how great a lot of the experiences are. Most people came away from RE7 with nothing but positive things to say about it.
Oh, right, yeah, RE7. Well,
Um,
that's what I always said is like horror is VR's best friend,
yeah,
right? But I don't know if it's so much better of an experience that it convinces everybody they need to get to VR. Maybe if they had like a bunch of horror games that are just significantly better
yeah,
in
it
VR.
needs more. And for me, I'm like, yeah, that's one thing. And then like, at Disney World, there's the Flight of Passage ride. It has 10K monitors. Granted, I think they need to adjust it a little bit, tracking a bit on the goggles. But that is the most. You'll never see anyone more depressed in your life than what I did when I went there last fall, and I was just hanging out in the gift shop that you walk into because you always exit into a gift shop. You never seen so many people like fucking bummed to be back on Earth.
Really?
Because it's a 4.5 minute ride, and you get put on like this big like chassis that like simulates a banshee that breathes, like it literally like breathes out like like the body of it that you're riding on. And like they do a really good job of like zapping you into the world, and then it's just like you're flying through Pandora for 4.5 minutes, in
Wow.
full 3D, and you're just kind of like, Jesus fucking Christ. It's just like this fucking experience that you just can't get on Earth. And then you get off the ride and you're like, life sucks. I'm here. I'm in fucking Florida. I'm in some weird fucking America's dick, the middle of America's penis run by some weird, like, Mussolini wannabe. Like, this fucking sucks.
I wonder, is it just that the hurdle truly is like there's no way to get that immersive experience at home.
Well, you're not going to get like the literal like motion shit, although it'd basically be equating to like buying a mechanical bull.
Right, Ready Player One type shit. But what I mean is like back when consoles first started being a thing at home, arcade cabinets were significantly better.
Right.
They just kicked the shit out of consoles.
Arcades were always the future.
Right, and then eventually home consoles not only caught up but overtook them.
Yeah.
Where it just like it was cost prohibitive to build a cabinet that could compete with a home console.
Yes.
There's got to be like a crossover point where home, VR overtakes what that experience can be, say, at the arcade.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think that comes down to how much can you, as a enthusiast, invest into your VR and customize your VR to be exactly what you want.
Right.
So
I think it really is like you need to find a way to make a game because people will say that. Here's the thing. you played RE7. I played RE7. Everyone played RE7. It's one of Capcom's best-selling games of all time. We like the game. We have nothing but really mostly positive things to say about that game. We 9 out of 10, right? There are people like Kenny and Max who played through it in VR, and this is one of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever had, all time. One of the greatest gaming experiences of all time. And it's like that's what VR needs. And I'm like, yeah, but it was still a 9 out of 10 experience without VR.
Yeah, right.
Like that's kind of like a little bit of the issue where it's like this game needs to be like a 10 out of 10 in VR and like a fucking 5 out of 10 without it. Like it has to be so much more boring to play. And then how do you do that? I don't know.
Well, I think there's no way to do that. And so what it needs to be a 10 out of 10 experience that people can't shut the fuck up about and does not exist on another platform.
Yeah. And you're right about that. And the hardest thing there is that that's going to cost a lot of money for a game that will not make it back, because the install base on any given VR headset is super fucking low still.
Right.
There's your fucking problem, is just that like, yeah, we need something that's going to have, $100+ million budget game on a system that has an install base of a fucking Sega CD. So
the sad thing is now we're out of the VC golden times. 10 years ago, somebody could have been like, hey, I need $1 billion to build a run of games for VR that sells the wider audience on VR. And you probably could have convinced some VC asshole to be like, yeah, I got $1 billion. Here you go. Money's free. And now we're like, all this inflation and shit is a direct result of that policy for the last 10 years. And so now it's like, it's the worst time to be like, I need $1 billion and I just got to burn cash. Like, I need to be the Uber of VR.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's just like, nah, go fuck yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the problem, because there were a couple of studios that kind of found that out the hard way with PSVR 1, because nobody knew, because what was PSVR 1 going to look like, sales wise. No one really had any. That was sold in stores. Those were in Walmarts, and shit.
And you could still find them pretty regularly.
Which is still really weird. Why VR2 is not I don't know.
They had a bad experience with VR1.
I guess that's kind of it, because because the reality is that like a lot of people were jumped on. They didn't know how well it was going to take, like, because a lot of VR, like PC, everyone has a PC, but does everyone have a PC that can handle VR setup? Well, yeah, that's the thing. So it was easier to gauge. Okay, well, everyone who has a PS4 can run PSVR, and that's a lot of fucking people who have a PS4. But the adoption rate was like fucking 5%.
Which isn't bad considering how many PS4s were sold, but
that's 5% of all the VRs, which then means like, what is the best-selling VR game going to have? 2%,
right?
3%, like 3% of that 5%. Like,
God, how many used PSVRs are just rotting in the back of GameStops everywhere?
Because that's the other thing. Now, no games are being made for PSVR. And none of the games are backwards compatible with VR2.
Yeah, I do think that was sort of a death knell move.
Like, I don't even think VR, like, with PSVR 2, like, its biggest problem seemed to be Sony created. Like, they made it weird and hard to purchase from them directly. They decided have no backwards compatibility. Like it's almost like they don't want this fucking thing to succeed for some fucking reason, yet they still put all the money into releasing it.
Whose baby do you think this is? Like, who has the juice that they're pushing?
Who amongst Jim Ryan and his cronies at Sony?
Someone's pushing for this, right? It can't possibly just be.
Because the thing is, with VR1, I would sit there and tell you, yeah, it's like someone who fucking got like he had that big coke rush and was like, the metaverse is the future, man.
Yeah.
Gotta invest. So they got real fucking into the idea of like VR gaming and metaverse and NFTs and all these other things are gonna be it. Like, it's gonna be great because we're gonna have a virtual world through VR, and you're gonna buy digital goods that you own through a blockchain and everything. It's good. You're gonna have a Second Life 2.5. Like, it's gonna be amazing. Like, a lot of people got real fucking sold on this, and I don't really get it. It seems like someone really came into all the fucking entrepreneurial tech sector and just said, I have this fucking amazing new grift. It's going to work. Trust me. And they all bought it.
What I like to say is that audacity is often confused for genius. So some guy came in there and so confidently was all like, this is going to change the world, that everybody that had even half a brain was just like, oh, well, he seems really confident about it. I better get on this fucking train. Because Steve Jobs, how many times did he go, this is going to save the world? And people were all like, that guy's full of shit. And then he did it several times, to the point where now, if you're all like, yeah, people doubted Steve Jobs, he got fired once.
Yes, he did.
You'd be like, that's fucking
He got
insane.
fired from Apple.
Right. You'd be like, that's fucking insane. What an idiot. Who would do that? Who would do such a thing? Nobody wants to be the guy who was an idiot about Apple. So now they're just like jumping at every fucking chance. And again, money was cheap. So I do think that there is that. Some guy walked into a boardroom and was like, VR's the fucking future. And if you don't get on it now, you're never going to be on it. It's like,
okay. And I think the thing is that it kind of reminds me of esports a little bit, where a bunch of esports just also this past week or so got shut down.
Right.
They're like, why? I'm like, because there's no fucking money in it. There never really was. Like, because you tried to force a thing instead of letting it naturally become a thing.
Right.
That's, to me, that is the big problem here with a lot of VR, was just kind of like, people were sold on this idea that VR is the future. We have to invest. And it's like, just let it naturally become, like, word of mouth. It will be your greatest ally or whatever on it, but again, like, that also runs into the same problem you already brought up, where it's just like, you need someone to spend a big AAA budget on a game and have a big exclusive gaming experience that you can't get anywhere else, that has to only be on VR. So in a weird way, it's stuck between a rock and a hard place, where it needs that killer app, and it needs to be exclusive, which costs money. But the thing is, a lot of money's been dumped into VR for kind of all the wrong reasons.
Well, there is somebody who could sort of figure out how to fall on the sword, where it's like, you buy Microsoft's VR, Xbox VR, and all Game Pass games are included on it for a year. You get Game Pass, you get the VR versions of Game Pass for a year if you buy the Xbox VR.
Well, they don't have a VR, but yes, I get
right.
what you're
yeah,
saying.
No, I mean, I'm saying, like, there is a company that could fall on that sword. So maybe PSVR, maybe that's the hook. Maybe if they go like, hey, if you buy a PSVR, you get all the VR games on our premium extra, whatever the fuck.
Yeah, PlayStation Premium Extra, whatever the fuck.
Yeah. If you buy the VR and you buy the premium, you get all your solid.
I would say you should get at least a year, if not 2 years, of PlayStation Premium paid for if you buy a VR too. Right. And then we put VR games on maybe not every VR game, but we put a number of VR games on the PSVR. So it's like, you bought the VR, and then you're going to have access to this Netflix thing that's going to have like a rotating list of VR games for you to check out and play as they come out.
And maybe that's the easiest way to eat profit, or to eat those losses while incentivizing consumers to take the leap. You can, if you could sell them on the idea that they're getting truly $500 worth of games by buying your $500 system.
Add-on to your $550 add-on to your $500 system.
Right, where someone's like, oh, it's $1,000 value for $500. If you could figure out how to do that, maybe. And that wouldn't be necessarily the worst deal if you're really into VR.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, that's kind of like probably what VR needs more than anything, is just like, if you've gotten someone to commit to the headset, give them access to a bunch of different games, and not just like little like demos that are like, oh, this is just a demo experience. I'm like, no, that's the whole fucking game, bro.
Right.
There was a lot of that on PSVR 1, where it's like, here's Batman VR. What is Batman VR? It's basically a demo.
You've got to figure out how to turn them from early adopters into evangelists.
Yeah.
And how do you do, you sort of have to create a cult around your your product.
Mhm.
Like it's such a good deal if you love gaming that like
And
why
for
not take the
and
you know
forever, even before we had it, we were always saying Game Pass is like the best deal in gaming. It really is.
it is. Yeah,
Um,
it's just worth having.
and it's like you don't even have to have Game Pass to know that. So I think VR should kind of really needs that thing where it's just like, what if PSVR 2 was just part of the PlayStation Premium thing? And it's just like, yeah, all like tons of VR games, just Sony doesn't want to do it because they're Sony and they're assholes, but like
They want
they don't
all the goddamn money.
right because they don't want to put like day one first party games on their PlayStation Premium. Like, well, you should for VR2. Maybe every first party Sony VR2 game should be a day one thing. Like on the
Right.
PlayStation, like that's a great incentive right there. So there's like, okay, so I have access to Gran Turismo 7 and Call of Duty, not Call of Duty, Horizon, Call of the Mountain, like Horizon VR. Just have that accessible. It's like, well, then we're not going to make any money on that. I'm like, but how many more people would be willing to buy a VR2? If they had access to play these games on the PlayStation Premium service versus
Right.
people who just well, it's $550 and then I gotta buy $60-$70 games separately. And fuck that. And none of my old games work. Nah, no, I'm good.
Yeah, I don't know how you convince, especially in like a modern climate, how you convince them to not make all of the money. Like you
Well, I mean, that's kind of the problem with corporations right now in general is and we saw this as with all the BRs and live service games fucking dying. And it's like, why are they all dying? Because they all wanted the companies wanted to make all the money in the world. They weren't happy with some money.
right, they were trying to kill like every BR that came out was like this is the new Fortnite, but Fortnite's right over there, you know.
Fortnite didn't go nowhere.
Right.
It's still killing it.
And I think one thing that's interesting about Fortnite and maybe PUBG too, but Fortnite's never tried to be the new anything. It's just Fortnite. And like, yeah, they've updated some, but like they're not
They
the
dick around
experience of
with with
yeah,
their weapons and events and whatever, but it's like it's still just fucking Fortnite.
it's fucking Fortnite. They're not trying to be Halo. They're not trying to.
Well, they did the zero build, which was fucking like. There is an argument to be made there about how zero build actually brought in a ton of new fucking people.
Right, because the worst thing about Fortnite was all the building bullshit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
myself included.
Yeah. No, I zero build has been a great move. But it's still fundamentally fucking Fortnite, you
Yeah,
know? So one final thought on, maybe a way to incentivize VR, just generally speaking, is if you can't get a must play experience that is absolutely, um, you know, exclusive to VR,
yeah,
then you need to make sure that every one of your first party games that you're putting out has a must play version of it for VR. So you're going to put out fucking, I don't care what it is, even if it's a game that doesn't seem like it should be in VR, God of War. God of War better have a VR fucking version.
right.
Every
Because then
one of
it's
your games should have a VR version.
yeah, just so it's always there. It's always
Yeah, it's
you're
always an
always
option.
noticing it, like a VR mode, VR mode.
Yeah.
Maybe they
You
had like
you buy God of War. Oh, even if you're going to be a cunt and you're going to be like $5 more, you get the VR mode. You shouldn't. If you own PSVR, you can play the VR mode.
yeah.
Period. Should just be a thing, especially considering that they're all $70 games anyway. Suck my dick if you're going to tell me like, oh, that's just not possible. Fuck you. Yes, it is.
Oh, with Sony's money, yeah. I mean, you said specifically first party, every first party game. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's definitely possible with Sony's first party money. Like,
yeah. And Sony can then incentivize a third party to, if Capcom's releasing a new Resident Evil, and Sony can do the same thing they did for RE7 and incentivize a VR version of it.
yep.
They can figure out how to do it. And that seems like the bare minimum way to do it. And just like,
Yeah, like being aggressive because they're not really. It's weird how VR2, PSVR2 doesn't feel like they're being
they've
very
already
aggressive.
decided it failed. I'm
Yeah,
really sorry if you bought one because they're never going to fucking do anything with it,
yeah.
is really what it seems like.
It's been out like a couple days and it absolutely feels like that already.
Yeah. That's sad. Any final thought on that?
Um, again, for me, it's very much the convenience factor. I think I think VR was initially pushed too fast to being, oh, if this is the future, we got to push this now, 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 now. Everyone get a VR headset out. I think that was the mistake. I think it's still probably too early for VR for gaming. I think we need to wait until things just get like, smaller, easier, more convenient to use. We really got to I feel like we just kind of still got to wait on that. Like it might take years. It might take decades before we get to the point where like, okay, wireless glasses that can stream at a high fidelity, high resolution, high frame rate. That's just not going to be possible for like decades. I'm like, then it's not possible for decades, like we weren't, Toy Story came out and we didn't have games that looked better than Toy Story for some time. Maybe not as long, but
Right.
like 3D imaging came out in the 80s. Okay. We got 3D gaming in 96, 95, well, 95 ish, like maybe Virtua Fighter 93, but like it took a decade for like 3D video games to become a thing. And they were crappy at first.
Yeah.
Well,
no one knew how to do anything with it.
Yeah. And they were slow and the hardware wasn't really up there. And then by 2000, then it became like, okay, now things can run smooth, look good in 3D kind of things.
Right. And everybody knows the turning point for that was Blasto.
Bro, I saw an ad for Blasto in one of Steve's old magazines, and I was just like,
amazing.
Almost want to save this magazine just for Andrew.
You should have taken a picture of that and sent it to me.
Such a weird 90s ad, too. There's a bunch of really old people in superhero costumes.
Huh. Yeah,
bro,
I guess that does seem
90s are weird. It was basically saying about like how superheroes are all old and crappy and whatever, and they're not like they're not like the cool new superheroes like Blasto.
Well, I was thinking about this the other day. Like the 90s was such a weird microcosm. The 90s had amazing original films, which you just can't get, but it had like an aesthetic that just like was all its own.
Dutch angles, weird zoom ins, fisheye lenses.
Film was like the top of its game. Film never looked better than in the 90s, like in terms of just like the technology of film.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way it's like texture looked, everything was like peak in the 90s. And then digital kind of came up and started eating its lunch. But yeah, I don't know. The 90s was a wild fucking time. All right, we got patrons to thank. Again, if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Dude of the week was Pretzel Box. Thank you, Pretzel Box. And our producers for this episode are the Schmidt 1, Scrunami, Koroi 35, Hyper Viper 89, Ziggy Z, and Online Persona. Thank you, dudes. And we'll catch you next time.
Later, dudes.